the Cold War, the Falklands, the nuclear state, a prospect of a miners' strike, Greenham Common. It was Thatcher's Britain. At the BBC, there was no political dimension in their popular drama whatsoever. And I was really depressed about it, as indeed were other writers that I knew. And so I said to my closest colleagues, the only thing one can do is actually write stuff that we know is not going to get made, and but at least we'll get it out of our system. And that's how I started to write Edge of Darkness. I didn't really think that it stood much of a chance of being produced. The interesting thing was that I had written the first 2 episodes without an ending, but which was roughly to do with the miners. When it was commissioned by the BBC, surprisingly enough, Jonathan Powell had moved into a position of power there, and I'd done an adaptation for him. And as a result, he said, "I've got this new job, it's starting next October. Could you have Edge of Darkness ready by then?" And I said yes. And he said, "Well, I'll schedule it."
I was talking to Jonathan Powell, who was then head of the serials department, who wanted me to go and work in serials. And he offered me 2 possibilities. One was the Tom Sharp thing, which plot on the landscape. And then he said, "I've got this altogether more tricky proposition. So I've commissioned Troy Kennedy Martin to write something which then was called Magnox."
I was determined it would have a real political element, and at the beginning I thought that the miners' strike might provide me with one. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out, so I became more interested in the nuclear option and the nuclear state, of which there were half a dozen books. But that really didn't take off until I'd found the Star Wars speech of Reagan.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies?
I used to get a lot of telephone calls from people with ideas for television series back when I was probably the most visible critic of nuclear activities in the UK, and I always turned them down. But I got a phone call from Troy Kennedy Martin, whose name I knew and whose work I was familiar with, who said that they were planning a drama series, a thriller, with a nuclear theme, and would like to talk to me about it. And my instinct was to say, no, sorry. But Troy was so persuasive on the phone that I finally decided, well, what have I got to lose? Let's talk about it. So he and Martin Campbell came out to the house and described to me the sort of series they had in mind, what the story would be, and what the nuclear dimension might be. And to be honest, the nuclear ideas that they had at the outset were a little bit cockeyed, and I pointed this out to them. But I could see that there was the germ of something that might actually be extremely relevant.
I read the book by Lovelock about the Gaia hypothesis, and the Gaia hypothesis really said that the Earth was just one single organism, and that every aspect in it was kind of planned or focused on creating the maximum conditions for life.
Troy was somebody whose originality and his ideas needed to be treated with great respect. You know, that you didn't come in and impose glib theories of how to resolve this story at all. And of course, the more I understood from talking to him when we started the development process what was at stake, the more sort of mind-blowing it became.
So one had the political element, and one had the grief element, and one had the kind of policier, and a kind of louche kind of background of MI5, and so all that was sort of going well.
There was a target production date. I mean, Jonathan was brave enough to say, we're going to do this, and I trust you and Troy. And indeed, Martin, because I was able to bring Martin Campbell, the director, in the development stage, knowing that we were going to be held to account. Martin was certainly known to me and the coterie of producers who at the time were thinking about these things as one of the hottest rising directors in Britain at the time.
I've got a tough time ahead of me over the next 2 weeks. I'm not looking forward to it. See you when I get back.
Have a good trip.
I will.
I thought there was someone down there. Bloody reporter, more than like. Didn't look like a reporter to me, boss.
I immediately wanted to put Craven outside of London. There were a number of reasons for that. I had this idea about the miners' strike. I wanted to set it in the north. I'd done Lancashire with the Z cars, which I'd started years and years earlier, but I wanted to get this kind of dual northern perspective, and also a slightly conservative one.
Well, I'd worked with Bob for over 5 years at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And Bob was an immensely likeable man, but not the easiest person to work with on stage. He was the absolute essence of the dour Yorkshireman, something which was very valuable for Craven, of course.
Well, Bob was somebody, of course, that I had seen a lot in the theatre. I think he'd only ever been in one television, actually, at the time that we eventually cast. And we had a short list of about 3 or 4, Martin and I, and we went for Bob. And thank God we did.
But I had some of the right credentials, well, more or less the right age, and I was from the right part of the country for the story. And I think that also the director thought that he'd have a freer hand with someone who wasn't established, and I'd be more willing to work hard, which was required. It was 6 months solid filming and all over the country, and I was in just about every scene. So stamina was required, and application.
He brought a healthy scepticism to the thing, which is very interesting, but he also brought a fantastic kind of openness as well. The focus in Bob Peck's eyes, nearly all the way through this thing, is something that one very rarely sees, on the camera.
Come on, Ronnie. Let's get out of here. This is no place for you.
I'm staying.
That unblinking, questioning sense it's kind of palpable, really, when you watch it on the screen. A wonderful performance.
Ronnie, officially you have nothing to do with this inquiry. Unofficially, keep me informed.
Thank you, sir.
I think there's an absolute depth of sincerity in Ross. I guess that's what I was aiming for. that he's not just the career cop, but he's prepared to take certain risks. He goes out on a limb occasionally for Craven, and I think it's I think it was that sort of essence of intelligence behind the legwork. You know, Ronnie, you can't make allegations like this and expect to be taken seriously.
Can I have that back, sir?
We know it was Macroon. We have Lowe's dying statement. We have his prints on the card. Doesn't that satisfy you? We know why he did it. It was revenge. Does he have to put a bullet in you before he'll admit it? Now, this is going in my safe. And it'll stay there till you come to your senses.
I saw Ross as the kind of superior officer who's not sort of corrupt, but somebody who knows when to say, I've had enough and we're going to draw a line under this now. We're not going to get any further. And, you know, it's over. And at the same time, you know, he looks at various points through the action slightly ambivalent when, you know, the darker powers come on the phone from London. And, you know, he possibly knows something, but he's not going to act on it, you know. So, I mean, and I think that's a very common human characteristic, actually. But no, I mean, to me, that's one of the things Ross represents in the story.
You are about to meet Harcourt. Double first at Cambridge and an authority on EM Forster, he tells me, but a complete twat, I think, when it comes to making connections. Henry? Henry, this is Inspector Craven.
Ah. I was sorry to hear your news, Inspector. Letters, Ellen?
Yes, sir.
Must have been a great blow. Bizarre, I know, but not the sort who posts things to the Guardian.
Harcourt and Pendleton somehow, to me, are names which just say Blazers at Henley, you know. There's a, you know, they're great English establishment names.
Pendleton and Harcourt were functionaries, but at the same time, it was very important that I made them interesting and amusing. And I also derived, once I'd got the hang of who they were, great amusement from actually working on their characters.
I think I drew on the text, really. I mean, I could see what his work was, vaguely, and the lines are quite jokey, and I think one had to find a public face for this man, the face he presents to everybody. And it struck me when I read it that it was a little flip and quite light. And I think that hid probably an intensely serious character.
Thank you.
Breakfast?
Yes, large malt on the rocks, black coffee with honey.
There's no need to play the text in Jedburgh. We can take it as read.
Your history, Harcourt. Heseltine's cutting intelligence by 15%.
We're not funded by the MOD, but by the Prime Minister's office.
And the Arts Council.
Mr. Pendleton has us down as a band of strolling players.
And the Commonwealth.
It's professional historians.
And the GLC.
A lesbian cooperative.
Frick and frack.
One of the things I really liked about the way that they were written was this wonderful sense of, you know, what happens when you have arbitrary power. You know, when you're not subject to the normal controls, and they do that in quite a civilized way as well. I mean, it was a really nice dimension to the whole thing, and it gave it a great deal of humour, I think, as well.
I think I gave Harcourt humour, which he probably didn't have too much of to begin with, because Harcourt obviously is incredibly bright, which, you know, a lot brighter than I am, and Oxford educated and all the rest of it. But I gave Harcourt a wry sense of humour.
Who's that man?
Nallers. He drinks at the Chelsea Barracks. He's rumoured to be the state executioner.
Who would he be after up here?
Could be you, old boy. The minister didn't take too kindly to that report of yours. But it's more likely to be Jedburgh. Ah, good. Thank you.
I thought I ordered oatcakes.
He's very, very sharp. He's very laid back. He's very astute. And he's also likes putting people... I think he makes them uneasy, quite frankly, and he enjoys the power that he has over that. Certainly with the Bob Pack character, he likes having all the information in front of him and just dropping it out from time to time to see the reaction.
What do you know about Gaia?
I know what my daughter told me.
And what did she tell you?
That it was an organization against nuclear power.
Was she a member?
Yes, I think she was.
You agree with her views?
No. But I enjoyed the conversations.
Sit down, Mr. Craven. Would you say that Gaia was a subversive organization?
They broke a few rules.
Did you know that 6 of them broke into the nuclear waste plant at Northmoor 8 weeks ago, and they were led by your daughter?
No.
What we want to find out is whether Emma's death had anything to do with the break-in. It's a very shadowy, murky world that he moves in, isn't it? And he obviously has access to many corridors of power. And these people exist. I mean, I don't know much about them, but they do exist, and someone's got to assume that that character has contacts all over the country and has access to all sorts of things that most people wouldn't have. I mean, he's been seconded in this particular piece by the Prime Minister's office, Cabinet office. But somebody else says he drinks with the SAS and he does this and he does that. So he's a man who can liaise between many walks of life. That's the sort of person he is.
In the very early drafts of it, Emma was a voiceover.
Not that. The colours all run.
We'd come to an agreement that Emma would be a projection of Craven's imagination. He would be talking because he was in sort of denial.
Put it on cold water.
I've done that.
We had her as a young girl in the back of the car going to London, and the scene should have been shot with 2 separate shots, one of Craven, and then he would talk to her, and then you'd see one of her, and then you'd go back to Craven. But Martin shot it as a 2-shot with Emma in the back of the car, leaning over Craven's shoulders.
What did the Queen say to you?
She said you must be a very brave man, Inspector.
Did she ask you to stay for tea?
No.
Oh, that way, you didn't stay for tea?
Well, there's a reception. We did have tea, but not with the Queen.
So at that point she became a ghost, because if Craven was real, then this Emma was real. It wasn't just something that he had sort of kind of invented. And Martin became immediately aware of that and said, "Is that all right, playing it this way?" And without any hesitation, I said, "Sure, it's fine."
He tried to make her as ordinary and matter of fact as possible, so there were no ghost-like effects. She was suddenly there, just as we responded to each other in that way.
That wasn't your nightie on the bed, was it?
No.
It was quite difficult to, and very cannily achieved, where a man was apparently walking on the street alone, and then at the next minute, it was all achieved by clever disposition of cars and objects to conceal yourself.
It was. And in that van down there was a man listening to every creak of the bed, every sound you made.
You're jealous, Dad.
New Scotland Yard.
This was actually a quantum leap in portraying Emma, and completely changed the this kind of strand in the story.
Come on, Daddy, get up. This is no time to break down. You've got to be strong, like a tree. Don't break. Please, Dad. Don't break.
Edge of Darkness had a great theme, and not to say any more about it except that Eric Clapton has been my lifelong hero.
Who was the best guitarist in England? And I thought of Eric and got it to Eric's manager, who laughed like a dream when I told him how much money we'd actually got. And he said, well, look, Michael, I like you, so I'll show it to him, and all that. And he rang me about a fortnight later. He said, I can't believe it. He wants to do it, he said.
One point he said, I've been asked to do a BBC television show. I wonder if you'd work with me on it. Of course, the opportunity to do anything with Eric would have been a godsend to me. We looked at one reel of this new film, Edge of Darkness, and I think both of us were in tears.
Don't worry, Daddy. I promised Mummy I'd look after you.
It was so incredibly moving. We were absolutely ready to rock on it. The idea was that we would come up with a theme that would serve as a kind of library for all 6 hours of television. So the original intention was to compose maybe 20 minutes of music. I had just gotten a new instrument called a Kurzweil. The fact was established that this keyboard made, for me, quite good string sounds. And Eric came over the house with a guitar and played me the beginning of a theme. And I heard his theme and I said, well, that could repeat and then it could go into this chord, and I'd play chords, and he started playing with me on the spot. And of course, within a few minutes, I think, the entire theme was constructed. It is monothematic. You know, there is one tune that echoes right down the line of Edge of Darkness, and it's subject to many variations. Sometimes the variation doesn't even come from the melody, but just comes from my accompaniment going, which to me felt like a cry, and a mournful kind of accompaniment. I like the chords too.
The first sequence we shot was in Yorkshire, and the majority of effects, not all of them by any means, the majority was going to be the rain.
On this occasion, those early scenes were certainly the first that I shot, and it was very cold and wet. I've never known so much rain as was produced for those scenes.
I'll leave a man here.
I don't want anyone in the house.
It's too wet for him out here.
They may be back. I'll see you first thing in the morning.
You might think Yorkshire, well, I'm afraid, yes, it's pretty damp sometimes, so therefore it's probably going to rain. No, we shot it in the middle of a drought. So you think, where on earth are we going to get the rain? Because with the best one in the world, we can't take it from the fire hydrants if there is a drought on and people aren't getting water through the taps. Obviously, that has to be a priority. We have to be seen to be doing it right. So in actual fact, we took it out of a pond in the end, and we used a pump fire engine. We had a specialist effects crew in who deal with water in a big way, in that they have a fire engine. They did all the moving of the water, and in fact I know exactly how much water we used. We used 24,000 gallons because the fire tender was 400 gallons, and I know how many trips it did.
Ready? Go.
Oh, I've got this new recipe. Go with a tin of tomatoes, a tin of aubergines.
Craven! You bastards! You bloody murdering bastard! It's your turn now!
We did have, of course, the very controversial shooting of Emma, played by Joanne Whalley. This was going to be very tricky, basically, because she had to wear this very thick plate. On that, we've got small charge plates that the actual little tiny charge sits in. And then on top of that, we've got blood bags. And literally, we took one of those domestic bag sealer devices and we made the bag ups from that, because we had 6 different depths, because it's supposed to be a shotgun. There wouldn't be one, there'd be several holes going in. Looking back on it, yes, it was very horrific. Looking at the time, probably this is what we're doing. We're effects people. We do this sort of thing. So you look at it very clinically. As long as the artist is happy and you're getting the shot the director wants, fine. We had a stunt advisor there to tell Joanne how to fall, because it was all done by herself except the very, very top shot, which the stunt girl did, because she was literally pulled back for a very high shot. But this, I mean, I feel very sorry for her actually now, thinking about it. For old Jo, she'd come in very, very new to this sort of thing. There we were fixing this big plate to her. She had a harness on the back the stunt girl was going to pull. She had to fall backwards onto the mattress, and it was raining. And all of this, and she did it twice. The plutonium was a very important part of the whole procedure, but really it ended up being purely effects. It was sort of my decision actually what it was going to end up looking like and what it was going to be contained in. And it was contained in one of these. Well, I've had about 32 of these, I think, bought from Woolworths because we had to buy them in a hurry. Stick a label on the front of it, you'd never know the difference. Foam inside, and there's a plutonium, a real plutonium bar, but I think it is anyway. But we made, I said, about 3 dozen of these things, and they're basically cold cast resin. But they apparently would be about the sort of size that you might expect plutonium bar to be.
This future nuclear state will be an absolute state, whose authority will derive not from the people, but from the possession of plutonium. And just to make sure we all know what we're talking about here, I brought some of this stuff along with me today.
You can pick up a piece of plutonium quite safely. It'll feel bizarrely warm to your hand. Metal doesn't usually feel warm. Plutonium does, because of the radiation that's the radioactivity that's going on inside it. But the penetrating particles won't even go through the epidermis on your skin. They'll be blocked by the outer layer of your skin, so you're not likely to get any problem from handling plutonium by itself. If you have 2 Mars bar sized pieces of plutonium, each of them is so-called subcritical.
2 bars of weapons-grade plutonium. I stole this stuff on orders, straight out of Jerry's latest acquisition.
If you bring them together they are supercritical.
Careful, terrorists. 400 rads, ladies and gentlemen. A lethal dose to anyone within a radius of 10 yards. Get it while it's hot.
Then you begin to produce immediately a burst of neutrons and gamma radiation, which will do terrible damage to the tissues anywhere nearby. because those neutrons and gamma rays go through the air molecule so fast, you get a bright flash of light as well.
Hey, what's the matter? Don't y'all want to be part of the new age of plutonium lunacy?
Well, the end of the whole show was meant to be done in Scotland, and the weather was terrible, and it kept on raining, and we lost time and we lost days. And we ended, and we all went home, and they said, well, we haven't done the ending of the movie. And they said, oh, we'll have to do it in Wales. It'll be fine. And when we got to Wales, when we got the rewrites for the ending, it was an entirely new ending.
One of the endings that I'd been sort of aiming for was, with the idea that Craven was in some ways a green man, was that in the end that he would turn into a tree. And I saw him as an old oak tree, sort of hundreds of years later. So he would represent, and the tree would then represent, would be this scarred but still kind of living representation of the planet. Unfortunately, Bob Pett didn't really see that as an ending, and he was concerned, or he put it more brutally than that there was no way he was going to turn into a tree.
Troy Kennedy Martin blames me for the fact that we never achieved this effect, but I refused to accept the blame. It was a sort of, we sort of gravitated to not using that as a conclusion to the story, for various reasons. One was that it didn't seem to be working in script terms. It seemed as though we wouldn't be able to make it work for the audience.
And it seemed to me that it was going to be, frankly, highly expensive and likely not to come off as an effect. So there was a completely practical reason why I felt a bit sceptical about it. But on the other hand, we didn't really have an agreed satisfactory ending anyway. Troy wrote about 12 versions of the ending, one of which was eventually almost the penultimate one, was the one we used.
Instead, we used the black flowers, which is part of, it is described in Lovelock's book, which is at some point in the long distant past, when the Earth was further from the sun than it is now, its trajectory was not enough to give it the push to bring life to fruition on the surface of the Earth. And in some kind of way, the first vegetation was black, and that attracted heat, and with the heat came the first manifestation of life. So one used the black flowers as a kind of warning and as a symbol at the end, and it kind of worked in that way.
It was clear that to everybody involved that this was something special, that this was something way beyond the ordinary television series.
The production values of all 6 episodes were astonishing, I thought. And that doesn't age. You know when you're watching it that you're watching a classy piece of work.
It hasn't dated at all. It came back as a story rivetingly. I was gripped by it like I haven't been gripped by anything for a long, long, long time.
And Troy wrote an amazing script, and Martin had a vision, and between them they turned in something which is equally as good now as it was then.